So far we've installed the software we needed, imported the shapefiles into Postgres. Now we need to actually start displaying those as maps, and we're going to use MapBox Studio to do that. So if you go and open MapBox Studio, now MapBox Studio splits into two separate parts really, all in the same user interface. The first thing we're going to need to do is actually to log into a MapBox Studio account. Now, depending on how much space you need, you might be able to use the free account. But otherwise you need to go and have a look at MapBox and see the different costs for what you need to use. Now what we're looking at here is the storage space available. So on a starter pack there's only 100 meg. 100 meg won't even fit in the shapefiles I'm using, so you're going to need at least a 1 gig for this one, but it will depend on how much data you've got. That's really for what we're doing here, styling a large data set is really what's going to be the decider of which plan you're on, but you can see they're great value. So I'm going to connect my MapBox account in MapBox Studio. And I need to allow access to it. As I said, there's two different parts to MapBox Studio. There's the data source, which is your vector data source, and there's the style, which is how you tell the map software how to actually make your data look. And we're going to start off in this part of the tutorial actually setting up the data source, so actually getting Postgres connected to this. So we're going to go over here and click Create Custom Vector Data Source. Fine. Full screen my map up. You'll see there's not a lot going on here. I've not got any data in here yet. Now, this is where the map should actually start showing data. Now when we're not looking about styling the data here, remember we're just getting the data in and being able to make sure it looks how we expect it to. So we're going to start off by adding a PostgreSQL layer. Now if you've ever used MapBox Studio to load things like KML files or shape files, it's really straightforward. You just find them on the file system and go for it. PostgreSQL is a little bit more complicated. So if we click on PostgreSQL down here, it brings up a big dialog here that looks a little bit scary. There are various different bits. This is the name of the layer we're creating, and we're going to start with the buildings. So call it building because that's what my shapefile was called. Give it a description, whatever you want, building in this case. Now we need to configure it to connect to PostgreSQL, or Postgres. So in this case, my database name is called tutorial. The host is localhost. The port is the default, so I can skip that out. The user is Postgres, and my password. Now you can leave the extent and the projection because that's what we converted the projection to in our OGR to OGR step. Buffer I'll talk about in a moment, and that's the kind of setup for connecting to Postgres. So buffer, this is used, what we're actually trying to do here is take the data that's stored in Postgres and convert it into the format that MapBox Studio needs, and it will do that on the fly for now. But what it's going to do is it's going to cut up our vector data into tiles. So like traditional bitmap tiles for maps, it's going to cut each part of our vector data up into a tile, and eventually we're going to upload those to MapBox to store under our account so that we can run our maps online, not just on our local machine. So the buffer size is how big an area it should be considering when it creates those tiles. And what this is really used for is when you're doing labeling, and you'll see on the roads layer we're going to use this differently, is that we don't want our labels to be cut as they go across the boundary between two tiles. So we'll increase that in other layers. For buildings, I'm not worrying about it, so I'm just going to leave it at the standard 8. This is something you quite often have to tweak for your own different layers. You might have to come back and play with it at different times. So it's a more advanced topic that I'm not going to cover right now. So now we're going to go over to the SQL tab. And in the SQL tab, what we need to do is write SQL queries that can run against Postgres to bring our data out from the right table and do some other clever things. So we need to write the query here. I'm going to cheat a little bit, and so can you. If you go into Google and do MapBox QGIS, so to write this SQL query, I'm going to cheat, as can you. I'm just going to go to Google, type in MapBox Studio, and then PostgreSQL. This will take me to the help file for MapBox Studio. PostgreSQL manual is the one you want. And if you scroll down here a little bit, this is kind of talking through what I've just shown you there. We're going to get to the bit where it's got a SQL query. Now we could do a really simple query like this, or a slightly more advanced query which starts to use the spatial indexes, which are the things that speed up data tables in Postgres. So we're going to copy this one, come over here and paste it in. Our table is called building because that was the name of the shapefile. Now I can go and show you the actual database tables as they currently are. If you hit your Windows key again, do pgadmin, and then navigate through these again into the schemas, public tables. Our OGR to OGR step has imported a table per shapefile. So building, electricity transmission line. You'll see they're all in here. They're all lowercase, no matter what the original shapefile was called. And we're going to start loading data from the building table. So from building, load the geometry column called WKB geometry, well-known binary geometry. And we can check whether that's actually what our geometry table is called in here. That's what OGR to OGR will put it in by default. And it's got this clever AND BB, or double AND BB. What it's doing here is in the background, when it runs this in MapBox Studio, it's going to replace BB with our bounding box, or the bounding box of the tile that's being requested. And what this is going to help PostgreSQL do, or PostgreSQL do, is only bring back data it knows might be in that box. So it's going to speed up, rather than loading all the data for each tile, it's going to only get the ones it thinks might be affected by it. So by default, MapBox say they do this, but there's no harm putting this in, and that's actually what their own kind of documentation is telling us to do. So select star from building, where well-known geometry intersects the bounding box, and bring it back as data. So this is the format that MapBox Studio requires you to do. I could select specific fields, so if I've got metadata fields I don't want in here, this one's just got an ID and a feature code, which you'll see we'll use later on. I could filter them out, but I'm just going to leave it like that for now. So connect to Postgres, give it a name for the layer and a description for the layer. You'll see what fields does in a moment. Set up the SQL we actually want. We're just going to click done now. So depending on how fast your machine is and a number of different things, it might take a while to do anything, but actually at the moment we're not going to find anything because where I'm looking at on the map is not where the data is. So actually if I go up here and search for Southampton, I can zoom the map and you'll see the coordinates have changed to zoom into Southampton, but I'm still not seeing anything. You can see at the moment I'm at zoom level 12 here. As I zoom in and out, you'll see that change. The reason I'm not seeing anything, and this is a bit confusing sometimes, is by default data projects, if you go into settings, they have a min zoom and a max zoom. So this is the zoom range over which the data that we're creating will work. And you need to set this depending on what your data is. If your data is just at country level, you can kind of have it like this, 0 to 6. Or if it's at city level like mine is, I want it available at a much wider zoom range. Actually, because it's only a small section, I don't care about it at higher zoom levels when you're kind of seeing the world. So I want it from about 6 to 18, which is just beyond this like really, really close in building level. So if I click save now, it'll ask me to go and save it somewhere. Annoying thing also, because it's cross-platform, is it can't get to any shared drives or any other drives other than C, so you have to save something on your C drive, which is a bit annoying if I'm honest. And give it a descriptive name. Click save. So this is going to just save the settings, not actually saving the data, it's saving the settings that we just created, so the layer and the link to Postgres locally on my machine. And then hopefully, as you see there, we start to get some buildings rendered, which makes a lot more sense. Now at the moment, because we're not talking about styling in this part of the project, they're just coloured by whatever MapBox Studio allocates to that layer. And you can see as I zoom in, it's relatively performant. Take a while to render on this virtual machine. There, I rendered all my detailed buildings. Now what I need to do is build up layer by layer all the data I need for my final map. And I'll show you one or two other layers we can import here and just kind of what you can do with them, but I won't go through every single layer in this dataset. I'll just load up at some point all the data layers already done. But we can do a bit more advanced querying on this data layer, because this is really detailed building level. You can see really zoomed down here. I don't really need this once I've zoomed out maybe beyond, let's have a look, this is the zoom level out here. Certainly zoom level 14 or 15 I can turn it off, it just isn't meaningful, so maybe let's say 14 is where I want to turn it off. So because this data source is eventually going to get chopped up into these vector tiles and uploaded to MapBox, this is where we choose how appropriate zoom levels are to a data source. So if you go back into the buildings layer and go to the SQL field again and then go back to the MapBox page we found earlier, you see if you scroll down a bit further there's a section about limiting by zoom, and it takes a second bit in the where clause here. So at the moment we've just got where the geometry is in the bounding box. I'm going to replace that. And we're going to replace it with this where z scale denominator is greater than equal to 6. So basically it says I don't want this to be shown unless the zoom level is currently greater than or equal to 6. I'm going to change that to 14. So I mean above zoom level 13, so as you're zoomed out in the world it won't even bother loading it. Now at the moment this scale denominator thing, this is something that MapBox have created for PostgreSQL. It won't just work out the box, you've got to go and install this this special script into your PostgreSQL database. That's what I'm going to show you how to do now. If you go back to the MapBox page, it's really good documentation on this. If you scroll to the top, this is this PostgreSQL vector tile utility, and you'll see here it says to add it to your database, download this lib.sql. So I'm going to open up that in a new window and run it against your database. And the way you run it against your database is by using pgadmin. So back into pgadmin, connect to our database. You have to go and find the database we're running on, which is the tutorial database. And then if you right click on it, you can do create script. We're going to run a SQL script on this database. So replace the text that's currently in here, paste in the SQL code that we copied from MapBox from this page we downloaded, and then execute it, clicking this play button here. There we are. It's executed. It just says no results because it's not like I was asking for any data back. It would come up with an error if there was an issue. So let's close that and come back. So now this scale denominator stuff will work. So if you get some error before you've done that, that would be why you've done it. So all I've done is gone in, added this extra where clause in this particular format. So when the scale is greater than or equal to 14, then show the building layer. Click done. So now we're at zoom level 14, zoom level 15, zoom level 13, it all disappears because the data is not relevant at that layer. Now that means later on when it chops up all these vector tiles, all the different zoom levels, it won't include the building data once we're above zoom level 14, which is great because we don't need that data around, so it's not going to take up extra space. So I'm going to just add in the roads layer in the same way we did a moment ago. Annoyingly, there's no way to just kind of duplicate a layer or anything. It's something that I'd love a feature in MapBox to be able to kind of do this very quickly, or to just point it at a whole load of tables. So unfortunately you have to go and type it in over and over again, which is a pain. And then our SQL query, we're going to start off with the same one we had a moment ago, the scale versioned one. And we're going to change the table name to be road. Remember, we've got all our tables here. So I know there is one called road. So road where scale is above, and we need roads at a much more zoomed out level, but remember our data is only going from 6 to 18 anyway, so we may as well leave it on 6 here. Just check we've got everything right. I need to change the name here. click Done. Now you can see we've got our road layer. And again, roads, this is not styling, so we're not looking at kind of thickness and stuff here, it's just literally the lines themselves. You can see we've got the whole lot here. As I zoom out, it'll get slower and slower rendering because it's loading a large proportion of the area. Now, we can do a slightly more complicated SQL query here, and this is the most complicated one I'm going to show you here, because obviously roads are of different categories, and the way that the data I happen to be loading categorizes roads. If you go into the road data here, go to fields, there is a classification field in mine, which is called classifica, and I'm going to use that to change which roads are loaded at different zoom levels in the SQL query. Now, if you're not familiar with SQL, this might seem quite complicated and it is more of an advanced topic, but it will mean that I don't have the kind of really detailed individual residential streets when we're far zoomed out and can't see them, and I'm only showing motorways and things. So I'm going to show you a quick simple example of how we can modify that query that's in here to categorize the roads differently. So we still need to keep this bounding box part of the query, and it always needs to be applied to all the different bits in here, but what we're going to do is create some or options, so either this or that, to our where clause. So we're going to start off by wrapping what we already have here for zoom level 6 in another set of brackets, because whatever happens in here, we're going to all together a whole load of these, but we still want to, for every single one of them, apply the AND criteria at the end that they're within the bounding box. So what we're going to start off by doing is saying that the zoom level should be greater than or equal to, and we're going to do 12 here. And we're going to do this for local streets, so these kind of detailed street level things. So we're going to say where the zoom level is equals 12 and classifica equals, and I've gone and looked up in SQL what all the possible values for this, and you have to look through your data file to see what it is, but mine happens to be called local street in this case. So where the zoom level is greater than or equal to 12 and the classification equals local street. Now, because I want to have more than one of these, I'm going to wrap it in another set of brackets. And then we're going to do another one. So I'm going to put a new line in. I'm just doing this so it's readable, and say or. So either the zoom level is greater than 12 and the classification is local street, or the zoom level is greater than, let's do, in the UK we have different categories of roads like A roads and B roads, so we will say, let's do primary roads next, which are the kind of next level up. Primary, no, B roads. So a few zoom levels up, because we want these to show at a higher zoom level, we're going to show B roads. So where the classification equals B road. So let me talk you through that. This is the same where clause we had a moment with a scale denominator, and it's saying where the scale of the map, which is what we can see here, is greater than or equal to 12 and the classification of the road is a local street, or the scale denominator is greater than or equal to 10 and the classification is a B road. So B roads will show 2 zoom levels above local streets. But for all of them, we're applying this bounding box where they're within the tile box that we need to do, so we don't load all the data. So if I've got that right, and I click Done, let me just turn off buildings for a second. You can see at this zoom level we've got all the different individual streets. As I zoom out, you see that change between 11 and 12. We went from all the roads to these kind of more major roads, these B roads. Okay, and I can actually do that for all the different categories of roads that I've got in this data set, and I'm just going to copy and paste this in hopefully. And you'll see we've got all the different road types in here. In my data set I've got local streets, B roads, A roads, primary roads, and so they've all got scale and the classification. And then right at the end here we've got motorways and a different style of motorway, the collapsed dual carriageway, which is not some kind of accident, it's just referring to how the road is constructed. I've not got any scale denominator on those, so they will just always show in this data set is set to show, because when I zoom out I want to still be able to see some kind of landmark roads, which would be the motorways. So if I click done on that, you should now see here's a motorway junction. I just happen to know from the shape that it is. When we're really zoomed in, we've got these secondary roads down here, and as I zoom out you should see less and less roads on the map until when I'm really zoomed out I can just see the motorways. So it's really clever how you can have that data turn on and off, not just styles turn on off, but the entire data turn on off at different data sets. And this is critical, and tweaking this will take some time on your data set, critical to making sure that the data you upload to MapBox is, one, not taking up a lot of room in your account, but also per tile MapBox have a limit of 500k of data that you can store in them. So you will actually need to tweak this to turn off information, and I'm still kind of in the process of doing this for my data set I've got here. There's a little tool built in here, and you can kind of see up here I've got a number here. If you click on the zoom level, and it's kind of hidden away, what this shows you in my current view as I've been zooming around, the tiles I can see at the moment on the screen are taking up at zoom level 14, which is the one we're at the moment, it's selected 42k. As I move around, depending on what area I'm in, it's a much less densely populated area, you'll see it alter. So you kind of need to make sure you're going to the worst cases to test some of these. But for each zoom level it'll tell you how much data there is. If I zoom out as far as I can go in my data set, you'll see there's very little. It's 1k of data at zoom level 8 because I've got those rows turned off. The worst that's probably going to be around is the first level that the minor roads come in at. There, that's probably going to be the worst. So zoom level 12, 30k. I'm still well under my 500k, but at the moment, don't forget, I've just got roads. I'm not even displaying buildings at the moment. I've just got roads and buildings on. If I then zoom in with buildings on, get to the point where they show in a really dense area, there we are, we've gone, zoom level 14 is now 34k. So you need to tweak this a little bit and turn stuff on and off. It's a limit for MapBox, so I'm guessing it's a limit to keep their performance up, and obviously you don't want your performance to degrade either, so it takes a bit of tweaking and a bit of playing around. But what you should end up with when you've imported all your layers are all your different layers for your data, and the last thing you really need to do before you start styling this is to set the order of your data. This is quite important. So those layers you want to appear above the other layers in terms of how they render later on need to be above them here. So I want roads to be underneath buildings. So if I drag it and drop it underneath, then later on when we're styling, it means that we won't have problems with roads drawing over the top of buildings. Now obviously buildings and roads shouldn't really intertwine, so it shouldn't be a problem. I'm sure there'll be some cases, but you can see here none of them do. But other features like rivers and roads obviously go over the top of each other. Forests will have roads going through the middle, and you had to get that order right, and it will be entirely dependent on your data set. The data set I've got here comes with some documentation that recommends some layers that and the orders you want to do them in. The other thing you'll probably want to do, and it's a bit of a pain, but later on, because you want to style roads with kind of fills and outlines, and you'll want the labels for the text description for roads to be able to styled, quite often you have to duplicate your roads layer so that you can label with one set of data and use the other for the styles, kind of the fill styles. Unfortunately, when you start to get into complicated styles that I'd like to create with this data set, that ends up having to be done. And it means you've got effectively twice your road data, which is a bit of a pain. You can potentially simplify, and that's come out of the kind of scope of this tutorial, but you can use some tools to simplify the data for when you're using it for labeling. But it's a bit dodgy if you do, because sometimes labels start not lining up with the roads that are underneath them, so it's a bit of a pain. But you can see here I've got probably the two largest files in my data set, I suspect. Let's try woodlands as well as in there. They're quite large, yet it's still being very performant on my machine. It's not really tasking the CPU, me zooming in and out here. It's getting the hang of it, and a lot of that's because I've now got that zoom level kind of turning on and off done. You'll also notice in this kind of X-ray view, when we're looking at the data here, I can click on a feature and it will tell me what it is, so I can see all the details behind it. And where it's difficult to click on one individual feature because there's lots overlapping, it will find ones near to you. So you can see here's buildings, here's roads. So it's a good way of debugging your styling later on, being able to come in and see what they are. And in the styling window, I'll show you how you can turn on this same view to be able to get to your raw data. But that's how you get the kind of layers I've got in here, and in the next tutorial I'll have loaded up all the other dataset layers that I need for my project. So lastly, you just need to make sure you've saved it. Make sure you give a name to your data layer and a description, and in this case I need to attribute it for where I got the data from. Make sure you get your attributions right, especially if you're using commercial data that has some kind of license to do with it. But we're just going to save that there. Okay, we're going to style this in a moment, but I won't show you uploading to MapBox in this video. We'll leave that till later on. But effectively, once you've got all your styles set and you know that your data is right at different zoom levels, you can come in and click this upload to MapBox, and it will upload the data to MapBox. And then once you've got your style, you can upload your style, and then hey presto, you've got MapBox serving your custom data and custom styles. But that's much later on.